One wrong turn changed the world forever. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, arrived in Sarajevo for a royal visit that would ultimately ignite a global inferno. Earlier that morning, the Archduke had already narrowly escaped a bomb attempt. While traveling to the hospital to visit those wounded in the blast, his driver took a fateful wrong turn near the Latin Bridge. As the driver braked to reverse, the car stalled directly in front of Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist who had been part of the earlier failed plot. Princip stepped forward and fired 2 shots at point-blank range. One bullet struck the Archduke in the neck, and the other hit his wife, Sophie. As they both lay dying, Ferdinand's last words were a plea. "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Live for our children." This local act of terrorism became the catalyst for World War I. Within weeks, the complex web of European alliances pulled the great powers into a conflict that would claim millions of lives, collapse 4 major empires, and redraw the map of the modern world. He was the apostle of peace, the man who spearheaded nonviolent resistance to end British rule in India. But on January 30, 1948, Mahatma Gandhi's life was cut short by the very violence he spent his life fighting. While walking to a prayer meeting in New Delhi, Gandhi was approached by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist. Godse bowed in mock respect before drawing a pistol and firing 3 shots at point-blank range. The world's greatest champion of nonviolence was gone in an instant, a loss that was mourned around the globe. Godse's motive was rooted in the bloody partition of India and Pakistan. He viewed Gandhi's efforts to bridge the gap between Hindus and Muslims as a betrayal, believing the leader was being too accommodating toward Muslims during the religious conflict. The assassination had a devastating impact. Ironically, Gandhi's death unleashed a massive wave of the very sectarian violence he abhorred, ultimately leading to the deaths of 1 million or more people. Yet his philosophy of nonviolence outlived his killer, continuing to inspire civil rights movements across the world for generations to come. Patrice Lumumba was a hero of African independence and the first legally elected Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But his dream of a truly sovereign nation would last only 7 months before it was met with a brutal end. On January 17, 1961, Lumumba was executed by a firing squad in a plot sponsored by the US and Belgian governments. Utilizing Congolese rivals and a Belgian execution squad, Western powers orchestrated what many historians now call the most important assassination of the 20th century. The motive was rooted in the Cold War. Western powers feared Lumumba's determination to gain full control over Congo's vast natural wealth, including the uranium used to manufacture the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. To the West, a nationalist leader who refused to be a puppet was a threat to their strategic interests. The assassination is viewed as the Congo's original sin, dealing a shattering blow to the nation's hopes for unity, democracy, and economic freedom. It triggered decades of political chaos and secessionist movements, leaving a legacy of unfinished work that continues to haunt the region today. November 22, 1963. A sunny day in Dallas, Texas, turned into a national nightmare. President John F. Kennedy, young, charming, and the darling of the American public, was riding in an open-top motorcade when the unthinkable happened. As the motorcade passed through Dealey Plaza, shots rang out. Kennedy was struck by a bullet fired from over 260 feet away. The shooter was identified as Lee Harvey Oswald, a former U.S. Marine and communist sympathizer. The image of the president slumped over in the car remains one of the most haunting moments in American history. The shock only deepened 2 days later when Oswald himself was gunned down while in police custody, never living to stand trial. This sudden silence ignited decades of conspiracy theories, leading many to believe a wider cover-up was at play to hide the true motives behind the murder. Kennedy's death marked the bitter end of an era of American hope and optimism. While his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, pushed through the civil rights legislation JFK had championed, many believe the assassination fundamentally altered the course of history, specifically regarding the escalation of the Vietnam War. I may not get there with you. Just 24 hours after speaking those prophetic words in his final address, the moral leader of the American civil rights movement was gone. Martin Luther King Jr. had long known the risks, even predicting his own assassination years earlier. On April 4, 1968, at 6:01 p.m., King was standing on the second-floor balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. He had come to the city to support striking sanitation workers. A single bullet struck him in the jaw, silencing the 39-year-old champion of nonviolence in an instant. While James Earl Ray was convicted of the murder, the shock of the event fueled decades of doubt. To this day, King's family and many scholars believe a wider conspiracy involving the government or the mafia was responsible for the plot to silence him. The killing set off a wave of deadly riots across more than 100 U.S. cities, sparking a universal response of grief around the globe. While King did not live to reach the promised land he envisioned, his death solidified his legacy as a global icon, leaving behind a body of unfinished work that continues to define the fight for racial and economic justice today. On March 15, 44 BCE, these words became a bloody reality for the man who had just declared himself dictator for life, Julius Caesar. Despite warnings from soothsayers, Caesar arrived at the Senate that morning at the peak of his power. As Caesar took his seat, a group of roughly 60 senators, Republican noblemen including his friend Brutus, surrounded him under the pretext of a petition. Suddenly, daggers were unsheathed. In a chaotic frenzy, the conspirators hacked at Caesar approximately 35 times, eventually leaving his body at the foot of his rival Pompey's statue. The assassins claimed they were not murderers but liberators. They feared Caesar's absolute power and believed that by killing him, they could revive the old Roman Republic and its ancient customs. But the plan failed. Instead of saving the Republic, the assassination triggered a series of bloody civil wars that led to its final collapse. Out of the chaos, the Roman Empire was born under Caesar's heir, Augustus, setting a new course for Western civilization that would last for centuries. April 14, 1865. The American Civil War had just ended, and President Abraham Lincoln, the man who had preserved the Union and abolished slavery, sought a night of relaxation at Ford's Theater. But in the shadows lurked John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and a Confederate sympathizer. Desperate after the South's surrender at Appomattox, Booth viewed Lincoln as a tyrant who had stripped away Southern rights. During the play, Booth slipped into the presidential box and shot Lincoln at point-blank range. While the president fought for his life, he ultimately passed away the following morning, leaving a nation that had just found peace in a state of profound shock and mourning. Booth's goal was to throw the U.S. government into chaos and potentially renew the Confederacy's ability to fight. He had even coordinated a larger plot to kill the vice president and secretary of state on that same night. The plan failed to restart the war, but it succeeded in shattering the Reconstruction era. Lincoln's death severely damaged relations between the North and South, changing the course of American civil rights for generations to come. He was known as the Liberator, the Tsar who freed over 20 million Russian serfs and promised a new era of liberal reform. But for the radicals of the 19th century, his changes weren't fast enough. On March 13, 1881, Alexander II was traveling through St. Petersburg when an assassin from the group Narodnya Volya, the People's Will, threw a bomb near his carriage. The Tsar survived the first blast and stepped out to check on his wounded guards. That's when a second assassin stepped forward and hurled an explosive device directly at his feet. The revolutionaries believed that the only way to destroy the Russian system of autocracy was to kill the man at its head. They had hunted the Tsar for years, surviving several failed attempts before this final, bloody success. The plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of sparking a revolution, the murder terrified the Russian leadership. Alexander's successors abandoned his liberal reforms and enacted a brutally conservative and repressive agenda, steering Russia toward the path of extreme tension that would eventually lead to the Revolution of 1917. The most successful assassination in modern history. On November 4, 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, a former general turned Nobel Peace Prize winner, stood before a crowd of 100,000 at a peace rally in Tel Aviv. As the rally ended, Rabin walked toward his car. In his pocket was a blood-stained sheet of paper containing the lyrics to Song for Peace, which he had just finished singing. Suddenly, Yigal Amir, a 25-year-old law student and far-right extremist, approached from behind and fired 2 shots into Rabin's back. Amir was a radical opponent of the Oslo Accords, believing that territorial concessions to Palestinians were a betrayal of Jewish land. He claimed he was acting under the religious concept of Din Rodef, the law of the pursuer, believing that by killing Rabin, he was saving Jewish lives. The shock to the Israeli public was profound, but the political impact was even greater. While most assassinations failed to kill an idea, this one did. It effectively shattered the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, making it one of the most tragically effective political murders of the 20th century. Indira Gandhi was India's 3rd prime minister and remains the country's only female leader to date. A powerful and often divisive figure, she governed India through periods of intense war and internal political struggle. On October 31, 1984, the unthinkable happened. As Gandhi walked through her garden for a scheduled interview, she was gunned down in a shocking act of betrayal. Her assassins were not external enemies, but 2 of her own trusted Sikh bodyguards. The killing was a direct retaliation for Gandhi's decision to order a military raid on the Golden Temple in Amritsar earlier that year. The temple is the holiest site in the Sikh religion, and the military action, intended to remove militants, resulted in heavy damage and deep resentment within the Sikh community. The impact of her death was immediate and bloody. It triggered a wave of horrific sectarian violence, with retaliatory anti-Sikh riots erupting across India that left an estimated 8,000 people dead. Indira Gandhi's assassination remains one of the most significant moments in modern history, illustrating the devastating collision of politics and religious tension.